They buried me in lies while I was still breathing. My own son told the world I was gone, just so he could build a life without me in it. And sitting there, hearing my death spoken aloud, was worse than any grave. My name is Eleanor Winslow, and this is my story. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know who's here, listening. I still remember the weight of the casserole dish in my hands that evening. It was the same one I'd baked in for decades, thick, chipped around the edges, the glaze worn dull from years of scrubbing. My late husband used to joke that if an earthquake ever came, that dish would survive when the rest of the house didn't. I suppose that's why I chose it. It wasn't just food, it was history. Our history. I had spent the afternoon stirring, seasoning, layering noodles with sauce the way my son loved as a boy. He used to wait by the oven, tugging at my apron, asking if it was ready. Just one. More minute, I'd say, even though we both knew it was longer. That memory had carried me through the quiet hours of cooking, through the silence of my house. And so, on impulse, I decided I would surprise him. No phone call, no text, just me, his mother, standing on his doorstep with a dish hot from the oven. After all, isn't that what family is? You don't need an invitation. You show up because love is reason enough. The walk up his front path felt longer than it was. He lived only 20 minutes away, but standing there, staring at the lights. Glowing behind the curtains, I suddenly felt like a stranger about to intrude. My hands trembled slightly as I shifted the casserole to one arm and raised my other to knock. 3 slow knocks, hollow, wooden, echoing. I heard movement inside, voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. For a moment, my heart lifted. He was entertaining. Maybe I'd walk into a gathering and he'd beam proudly. This is my mother. She made this for us. I imagined the warmth of introductions, maybe even the grandchildren rushing to hug me, but then the voices hushed. Footsteps approached the door, slower than I expected, hesitant. The porch light flicked on, spilling harsh brightness over me. I adjusted my scarf, smoothed the front of my sweater. The door creaked open just a few inches, enough for one wary eye to peek out. My son's eye. Mom? His voice wasn't joy, not even surprise. It was tension, like a man caught in a place he shouldn't be. Yes, I said softly, lifting the dish slightly. I thought I'd stop by. I made too much for just me. He didn't open the door wider. Instead, he stepped outside, pulling it close behind him so only a sliver of light leaked through. I caught the scent of roasted meat, perfume, something expensive I didn't recognize. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his words clipped, low. I blinked. "I just wanted to see you, to say hello." I forced a smile. "I thought maybe we could share dinner." His eyes darted over his shoulder, then back at me. "You should have called." I felt the casserole grow heavier. I didn't think I needed an appointment to see my own son. My voice cracked, though I tried to hide it. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "It's just not a good time." Through the narrow crack in the door, I glimpsed movement, figures passing, a woman's laugh, the shimmer of a wine glass raised. My son noticed my glance and shifted his body, blocking my view. "Please," I whispered. "Just a few minutes. I brought your favorite." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Finally, with visible reluctance, he opened the door wider. Just enough for me to step inside. The room fell silent. I stood in the entryway, clutching the dish, eyes adjusting to the warm glow of chandeliers and candles. A long dining table stretched across the room, polished and gleaming, crowded with people dressed in suits and elegant dresses. His wife was there at the far end, smiling stiffly, her hand frozen around a wine glass. Every eye turned toward me. And in that instant, I understood I wasn't meant to be there. I swallowed hard, forcing my smile to stay, though my cheeks ached with the effort. "Hello," I said to no one in particular. lifting the casserole slightly as if it explained everything. A few murmured greetings floated back, polite but strained, like the sound of strangers in a waiting room. My son closed the door behind me with a soft but decisive click, then placed a hand lightly on my back, guiding me not to the head of the table, not even beside him, but toward a chair in the corner, away from the light, away from the conversation. Lowered myself into the seat, the dish still in my lap, its heat seeping into my legs. The laughter resumed, but quieter now, with glances thrown my way between sentences. I sat still, back straight, hands folded around the casserole. That's when I heard it. A woman leaned toward my son, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch. "So, what did you tell everyone happened to your real mom?" My breath caught in my throat. I froze when I heard those words, "your real mom." The casserole shifted slightly in my lap, the heat biting into my thighs, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My son chuckled softly at the question, though it wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a performance, the kind of sound someone makes to smooth over tension. He leaned back in his chair, waved his hand as if brushing away a bit of dust. "Oh, she passed when I was a kid," he said. "Cancer. Rough time, but we managed." The room collectively exhaled, as though his answer had completed some tidy narrative. A woman across the table even lifted her glass, murmuring, "To resilience." Others nodded in sympathy, their faces painted with that strange mixture of pity and admiration. And I sat there, alive, breathing, my heart pounding in my chest, listening to my own death spoken as casual fact. The blood rushed in my ears, so loud I barely heard the scrape of a chair as his wife stood and walked briskly to me. Her heels clicked like metronomes against the hardwood. She stopped just short of my chair, bent down, and whispered through a smile stretched too wide. "Please don't make a scene. Just sit quietly, all right?" Her hand grazed the casserole dish as though she might take it, but I tightened my grip until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to speak, to stand, to shout, "I am here, I am his mother." But the words stuck in my throat like dry bread. I could only watch as she turned, glided back to her seat, and seamlessly rejoined the table conversation as though nothing had happened. The meal resumed. Forks clinked against china, wine was poured, jokes were exchanged. And me? I was invisible. From my corner, I studied the room. The walls were decorated with framed photographs, snapshots of vacations, graduations, birthdays, my son, his wife, their children, her parents, everyone beaming in coordinated outfits. I leaned forward slightly, squinting at one photo in particular. It was my son as a boy, standing in front of the house where he grew up. My house. But where I should have been, beside him, hand on his shoulder, there was only a slice of empty background, cropped to remove me entirely. My stomach twisted. I looked to the next frame, a wedding photo. Him at the altar, his bride radiant. I had been there, tucked in the second row, tears sliding down my cheeks. But here, on this wall, the image ended neatly before my seat began. Each photo told the same story. He had rewritten his life without me. My hand trembled as I reached into my bag for a napkin, pretending to dab my mouth though I hadn't touched food. Inside, my fingers brushed against the folded scarf I'd carried along, blue and frayed, knitted by my hands one winter when he was 12. He used to wrap it tight around his neck, grinning as he trudged through the snow. Now it felt like a relic from another world. Someone at the table called his name, pulling my son's attention. He leaned forward, smiling easily, pouring wine for his guests. And then, mid-laugh, his gaze flicked toward me. For just a second, our eyes locked. His smile faltered. Not much, just the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. But enough for me to see it. Shame, fear, maybe even resentment. It wasn't the smile of a man proud to see his mother. It was the smile of someone desperate to keep control of a story he had carefully crafted. A guest asked about his childhood, about growing up without a mother. He launched into a well-rehearsed anecdote about hardship, about his father, working double shifts, about finding strength in the absence of maternal comfort. The table sighed and nodded, hanging on every word. I clenched the casserole tighter. The weight of it now seemed absurd, comical even. A heavy, bubbling dish that belonged in the center of the table, yet sat cooling uselessly in my lap, as misplaced as I felt in that room. A small voice inside me urged, "Leave, stand up and walk out. Spare yourself." But another voice, quieter, steadier, whispered, "Stay, see. You need to see the life he has built without you." So I stayed. And with each passing minute, the truth settled like stones in my stomach. I wasn't just uninvited. I was erased. And yet, there was more. Something gnawed at me, a question left unanswered. Why would he go to such lengths? Cropping me from photos, burying me in lies, replacing my presence with an invented past? The answer came unexpectedly, when his wife leaned in to toast him, her words sliding across the table like a blade. To my husband, who overcame so much without a mother's guidance, and built this beautiful family with me. Glasses clinked, wine spilled in celebration. And I finally understood. I wasn't merely unwanted. I was inconvenient. My existence contradicted the story they needed to tell. I lowered my eyes, pressing the napkin harder to my lips, willing my tears not to fall. But they came anyway. Silent, hot, hidden in the shadow of the corner where I sat unseen. When the plates of roasted lamb and glazed vegetables were passed around, no one extended one toward me. I sat quietly, hands folded on the casserole now cooling in my lap, while the others filled their plates and praised the seasoning. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the room, making my stomach churn, not with hunger, but with the bitter realization that I had carried something nourishing into a place that wanted none of me. I shifted in my chair, the wooden frame creaking beneath me, and let my gaze wander again to the walls. The photographs had become a silent jury, each one condemning me with its carefully edited version of the past. There was my son at a high school graduation. I had sewn his gown hem shorter because it dragged against his shoes. But on that wall, he stood alone, mortarboard crooked, no proud mother adjusting his collar at the last minute. There was his college acceptance day. I remembered holding the envelope in trembling hands, ripping it open before he could even sit down. I had screamed, laughed, cried all at once. But here? The photo showed only him and his father, arms thrown around each other. I was absent. Even the more recent ones, his children's birthdays, their first days of school, showed only one side of the family. His wife's parents were there, smiling broadly, center stage. My chair was always empty, my gifts unwrapped off camera. My face, erased. It wasn't just omission, it was surgery, a deliberate carving away of every trace of me. My chest tightened as I remembered the old shoebox of photos in my closet at home. Birthday cakes I baked, costumes I stitched, messy haircuts I gave with trembling hands. Those moments had been real. I had proof. But here, in this house, reality had been rewritten into a story where I was a ghost. The conversation around the table blurred into a dull hum, like the buzz of a television in another room. I only half heard words like deal closed, investors, foundation gala. Each sentence felt like it belonged to some polished world I had no entry to, a world where my son was admired, respected, untethered from the messy truth of his beginnings. Pressed my lips together, swallowing the urge to speak, to ask, why? Why am I not enough? Why must I be hidden like some shameful secret? But the lump in my throat grew too large, choking back every word. When I finally rose from my chair, no one seemed to notice. I clutched the casserole close to my chest, pretending I was only stretching my legs. The dining room faded behind me, As I stepped into the hallway, its silence wrapping around me like a heavy cloak, the hall was lined with more frames, smaller ones, a mosaic of moments. I traced my fingers lightly over the glass of one picture, feeling the cold smoothness where my image should have been. I turned a corner and found myself before a closed door. Muffled laughter seeped from the dining room behind me, but this space was quiet, still. Slowly, almost against my better judgment, I turned the knob and slipped inside. It was his office. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with binders, awards, and photographs of professional triumphs. A sleek desk sat by the window, papers neatly stacked, a glowing laptop half closed. And there, on the credenza, was the largest framed picture yet. My son, his wife, their children. A family portrait worthy of a magazine spread. They were dressed in coordinated whites and blues, standing in a field of tall grass, golden sunlight behind them. Every detail was perfect, except one. Beneath the photo, engraved in polished brass, was a caption, "The Johnson family, 3 generations strong." But there were only 2 generations in that frame. My son, his wife, their children, her parents. 3 generations, but not mine. I reached out and touched the frame, my fingertip leaving a faint smear on the glass. I whispered into the empty room, "Where am I?" The answer was silence. My eyes drifted to a stack of brochures on the desk. A charity gala flyer, glossy and embossed with gold lettering. There, in bold print, was my son's name, listed as keynote speaker. The blurb beneath praised his resilience, his story of growing up motherless, raised by a hardworking single father. My stomach lurched. The lie wasn't confined to this house. It was public, broadcast, celebrated. I pressed the scarf in my bag to my lips, breathing in the faint scent of wool and thyme, as though it could ground me. My knees trembled. My son hadn't just erased me from his personal life. He had built a career, a reputation on the false foundation of my absence. And the worst part? Everyone believed it. Behind me, the door creaked. I turned, startled, to see his wife standing in the doorway. Her smile was thin, brittle, stretched too tight. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, her tone soft but carrying a warning beneath it. "I was just—" My voice cracked. I cleared my throat. Looking at the pictures. Her eyes flicked to the frame I had touched, then back to me. She stepped inside, closing the door with a deliberate click. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" she said, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from the portrait. "The way family should look." Her words sliced through me, each syllable sharper than glass. I nodded faintly, unable to trust my voice. She lingered a moment, her gaze heavy on me, before turning to leave. At the doorway, she paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Please," she added, "don't ruin this for him." The latch clicked as the door closed behind her, leaving me in a room filled with proof of my erasure. And for the first time that evening, I realized something chilling. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. I stood in that office long after his wife closed the door, staring at the portrait with its polished brass plaque. My reflection stared back from the glass, an old woman in a worn cardigan, hair tucked into a faded scarf, holding a casserole dish that had cooled beyond serving. I didn't belong in that room, but then again, hadn't I been told that in 100 small ways already tonight? My eyes drifted to the desk. A folder lay half open, papers spilling slightly from its edges. I shouldn't have touched it. Every instinct told me to leave, to respect boundaries. But boundaries had already been crossed. My entire existence had been redrawn, erased. Didn't I deserve to know how far the lie reached? I set the casserole gently on the corner of the desk and slid the folder closer. Inside were printouts, speeches, talking points, letters of introduction. My son's words, crafted for audiences I would never meet. My hands trembled as I scanned the lines. After losing my mother at the age of 6, I found myself learning strength from absence rather than presence. My father worked double shifts to make up for what we lost. I learned hard work by watching him sacrifice everything for me. When I speak to young people, I tell them that resilience is not inherited. It is forged in the fire of loss. Each sentence was a dagger. Loss? I had been alive. I had sat in the bleachers of his games, clapping until my hands stung. I had stayed up late sewing his school costumes. I had worked overtime shifts at the diner to afford his textbooks. He hadn't lost me. He had abandoned me. My breath came shallow, uneven. I turned the page. This one was an email, printed out. The subject line read, "Background check, family story." The text was simple, clinical. Narrative confirmed. Mother. Deceased in early childhood, consistent with foundation branding. No discrepancies. No discrepancies. It was as though my life had been filed away, stamped, and approved as a non-existence. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart pound wildly. My knees threatened to give out, so I sank into the leather chair behind the desk. It smelled of polish and power, so unlike the wooden kitchen chair I still sat in every morning at home. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness I saw flashes. Me holding him as a newborn, his first scraped knee, the birthday cake with 9 crooked candles, the smell of his hair after a summer storm. Memories vivid as fire, yet here, on paper, reduced to nothing. A sound startled me. The laptop screen flickered awake with a soft glow. I hadn't touched it, but perhaps the movement near the desk had triggered it. Against my better judgment, I leaned closer. The desktop was tidy, but one email notification sat open. My son's name in the sender line, the subject, bold. Final draft of keynote. The first line cut me to the bone. Without a mother to guide me, I had to learn how to navigate the world alone. My throat tightened. I clicked the arrow key, and the speech scrolled further. Paragraph after paragraph painted a picture of triumph over tragedy, a man raised in hardship but fueled by grit. It was beautiful, eloquent, moving. And it was all a lie. I reached for the mouse, intending to close the screen, when my eye caught something else. A folder on the desktop labeled simply, Press Kit. My hand hovered, then clicked. Up popped a collection of images, professional headshots, staged family photos, promotional posters. I clicked one at random. It was my son, seated with his children on his lap, his wife beside him, her parents behind them. A perfect tableau of lineage and love. The caption read, "The family behind the pie." Man, but where was I? Nowhere. I felt my stomach lurch as I realized this wasn't just about erasing me, this was about replacing me. His wife's parents had stepped into the role, standing proudly in the background, occupying the space where I should have been. They weren't just in-laws, they were his public family. The laptop chimed softly, an incoming email. I flinched, instinctively minimizing the folder. The subject line glowed. Looking forward to hearing your story of resilience tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, a keynote, an audience. A new room full of people who would hear my son's fiction and take it as truth. I sat back, breath shallow, heart aching with a mixture of rage and grief. He hadn't merely hidden me from a dinner party. He had buried me under an entire narrative, one that he performed, polished, and sold. My gaze drifted back to the casserole dish on the desk. The glass lid was fogged slightly, droplets of condensation cooling into tiny rivers. It looked pitiful there, surrounded by sleek technology and glossy papers, a relic from another world. I picked it up, pressing the warm bottom against my palms. The smell of baked cheese and tomatoes wafted faintly, carrying me back to nights when he would lean over the oven and ask, "Is it ready yet, Mom?" I whispered into the empty room. "I am not dead." The words were quiet, but they felt like a vow. For the first time that night, I wasn't just sad. I was angry, not the loud, thrashing anger of youth, but the cold, deliberate fury of a woman who had been erased one time too many. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing. His story would not go unchallenged. I left his office before anyone noticed I'd been gone. By the time I slipped back into the dining room, dessert plates were being cleared away. A chocolate cake, half eaten, sat in the center. No one offered me a slice. No one even asked why I'd been gone so long. I sat in silence until I could bear no more. With the casserole dish hugged against me, I rose quietly, muttering something about feeling tired. My son didn't protest. His wife only gave me that brittle smile again, as if she were relieved. The cold air outside hit me like a slap. I stood on the porch a long moment, listening to laughter echo faintly from inside. Then I walked down the steps and away from that glowing house, my footsteps slow, my shoulders heavy. But inside, something had shifted. The humiliation had burned away into resolve. I would not let my life, my sacrifices, be rewritten into absence. That night, I pulled the old shoebox from my closet, the one with frayed edges and a rubber band stretched tight around it. Inside were the memories I had kept safe. Polaroids from birthdays, ticket stubs from school plays, little drawings my son made as a boy. I laid them out on the kitchen table like a deck of cards, each one a rebuttal to the lie. There he was at 5 years old, frosting smeared across his cheeks while I held the cake knife. There he was at 12, wrapped in the scarf I had knit, grinning at the camera. There he was at 17, standing in front of the old Chevy I'd saved 2 years to buy him. I touched each photo gently, as though the paper itself were fragile bone, but I knew photos weren't enough. He had erased me from pictures. He could claim these were doctored, irrelevant. I needed more, so I began to gather. I called old neighbors who remembered me walking him to school. I asked the church to dig out baptism records with my name signed clearly. I found school permission slips in my handwriting, doctor's records where I was listed as guardian. Piece by piece, I built a folder. Every evening that week, I sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out like evidence in a trial. My glasses, perched low on my nose, I read each one twice, sometimes aloud, as though reciting proof to an invisible jury. And at the end of it all, I slid everything into a binder. A plain, ordinary binder. But inside, it was a mother's truth. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was clarity. My son had chosen to erase me, but I still existed. And if his story depended on my absence, then perhaps my simple presence, undeniable, documented, was the sharpest blade I could wield. One evening, as I slid the binder shut, I caught sight of the casserole dish on the counter, still half full and untouched. I almost laughed. That dish, heavy and chipped, had been the first offering he rejected. Now it sat like a symbol of everything I had carried for him, everything left uneaten, unacknowledged. I pressed my palm against its lid. "They will see," I whispered, and, in my heart, I knew. The time for silence had ended. The chance came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, an invitation appeared in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering. The Johnson Foundation Gala, an evening of resilience. I stared at the flyer a long time. There was his face, printed crisp and handsome, the headline beneath, "Keynote Speaker, a story of strength without a mother, without a mother." The words lit a fire in me. I slipped the binder into my bag, pressed the scarf inside too, and on the evening of the gala, I dressed in my plainest dress and set out. Not sequined or jeweled like the others would wear, but sturdy, dignified, honest. The ballroom was grand, lit with chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. Tables groaned under the weight of fine china and silver. I moved quietly through. The crowd, unnoticed, like a shadow in a world too polished to see me. When my son walked onto the stage, the applause thundered. He looked sharp in his tuxedo, his smile rehearsed, his posture perfect. I almost didn't recognize him. This man who belonged to everyone but me. He began his speech. I listened, my hands clenched in my lap. After my mother died, I learned resilience in her absence. Every milestone, every hardship was faced without her hand to guide me. Each word was a theft. I could feel the scarf in my bag, the binder pressing against my hip, as though urging me forward. My chest rose and fell in rapid rhythm. And then it happened. His wife spotted me from the front table. Her smile vanished. Her face drained. She whispered urgently to someone beside her. I stood. Slowly, steadily, I walked toward the stage. The room hushed, curiosity rippling through the crowd like a wave. My son's voice faltered. "Mom?" he whispered, the microphone, catching the word. I didn't climb the stage. I didn't need to. I stopped at the foot of it, opened my bag, and lifted the binder high for all to see. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the story you forgot to tell." Gasps spread through the ballroom. Cameras clicked, phones lifted, whispers surged. My son froze, the spotlight hot on his face, the lie unraveling in real time. I placed the binder on the nearest table, its pages splayed like open wounds. Photos of birthdays, school forms, baptism certificates, proof upon proof. The truth was out. I turned then, my scarf slipping slightly from the bag, its blue wool catching the light. My son stared at it as though it were a ghost come to life. For the first time in years, the silence belonged to me. I didn't stay for the rest of the gala. I didn't need to. By the time I stepped out into the cold night air, I could already hear the murmurs building behind me, the kind of whispers that spread faster than applause. The binder lay open on a table under chandeliers. My son's carefully polished narrative lay cracked, bleeding under the light of proof. I walked to the bus stop with the casserole dish tucked under my arm again, empty this time, like a companion too faithful to leave behind. The street lamps hummed softly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt solid, present. At home, I placed the dish back in its cupboard and hung my scarf on the chair where I always sat. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sipped, slowly, staring at the quiet walls around me. No applause here, no cameras, just peace. It was nearly 3 a.m. when the phone rang. The sound jolted me upright, the shrill cry slicing through the silence. I shuffled to the receiver, dread curling in my chest. Few good things come at that hour. "Hello?" My voice was rough with sleep. "Mom." The word cracked through the line like lightning splitting a tree. For years I had been mother, sometimes ma'am, often nothing at all. But in that raw, broken tone, he called me Mom. I held my breath. "Please," he said, voice trembling. "They're pulling out. Sponsors, investors. People are saying I lied. The board wants answers. My wife, she—" His voice cracked, muffled sobs breaking the edges of his words. "You have to help me. Say you were never there. Say you died. If you love me, please." I closed my eyes, pressing the receiver hard to my ear, as though it might steady me. His voice carried me back through years, birthday candles, scraped knees, whispered prayers. And now, here he was, begging not for my presence, but for my absence. Again. I swallowed hard. "You stood in front of a room full of people and told them I was gone." "I had to," he whispered. "It was the story they wanted, the story that made me everything I am." "Everything you are?" My voice trembled but steadied as I spoke. Without me? Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, shallow and fast, the sound of a man cornered by the truth. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was something else, clarity. He had chosen this path, stone by stone, lie by lie, and now it had led him to a place where only I could rescue him. But I had rescued him my whole life, and where had it left me? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. No, I said simply. The word was quiet, almost gentle, but it landed with the weight of a slammed door. On the other end of the line, my son let out a strangled sound. A sob? A curse? Perhaps both. You don't understand, he pleaded. Everything will fall apart. My career, my reputation, my family, your family? I interrupted, my voice sharp for the first time. You built a family without me. You replaced me in photographs, in stories, in memories. You buried me alive, and now you want me to die again for your convenience? Mom, please, no. My voice steadied, firm as stone. You had a mother. You had me, and the world now knows it. What you do with that truth is no longer my burden to carry. There was silence then, heavy and suffocating. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the collapse of the scaffolding he had built from lies. At last he whispered, I can't survive this. You will, I said softly, or you won't. But either way, you'll do it without me erasing myself again. I hung up before he could answer. My hand lingered on the receiver, trembling slightly, then fell to my side. The house was silent again, but this time it wasn't the suffocating silence of loneliness. It was peace. Walked to the kitchen, opened the cupboard, and pulled out the casserole dish one last time. I filled it not with food for him, but with a simple pasta and vegetables, then carried it down the street to the community center that opened its doors to anyone hungry. When I set it on the table, children rushed forward, their eyes bright, their hands eager. They ate with the kind of joy only honesty brings. No performances, no lies, just gratitude. I sat in the corner, watching them laugh, the scarf draped loosely around my shoulders. For once, I wasn't erased. I wasn't hidden. I was exactly where I belonged. Later, walking home beneath the stars, I thought about the words he had spoken, about the false death he'd written for me, and I smiled, faint but real. I was alive, and sometimes living is the sharpest revenge of all.